Well, good evening. It's 5:30, so we'll take a start for today's planning meeting of the 3rd of February. As always, I'd like to welcome members of the public here, councillors and officers, and I call upon the clerk who will advise how the meeting will be run this afternoon and this evening.
Please note that we are live streaming this meeting via the Council's YouTube channel to encourage more people to engage in our public meetings. The proceedings of the meeting will also be recorded. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and turn them off when finished. Please can attendees in person refrain from watching the live stream. This will cause interference for our viewers. Please also ensure that your mobile phones and iPads are turned to silent. We are not expecting a fire alarm testing today. In the event of an evacuation, please leave by the nearest exit and gather in the car park next to the library opposite Tesco. Should members of the public need to use the facilities, they are located through the doors to the right of the security guard. In accordance with the Constitution, members of the public who have registered to speak will be permitted to do so when invited by the Chair. I have confirmed those entitled to speak. Please note that the registered speakers are not permitted to approach committee members or distribute documentation to the committee during the course of this meeting. Each application will be dealt with in the following order. The planning officer will present the submitted application and will outline the proposed recommendation in full. Any speakers registered to speak on the application will be invited to address the committee. This will be taken in the following order. Speakers against, neighbourhood forums representatives, any councillors who are not members of the committee, followed by speakers in support of the application. All speakers will have a maximum of 5 minutes each to address the meeting. This will be followed by questions from members and responses from the planning officer. Once questions from the committee have concluded, the Chair will open the application for debate. At the conclusion of the debate, the Chair will seek a proposer and seconder for the application. The proposal must be in full and include all information, such as conditions or reasons. The Chair will then confirm with the planning officer if they wish to enter into a period of summing up. Members, if at any point you leave the meeting for any reason, during the consideration of any application, you will be unable to vote on that application. I will now hand the chairing of the meeting to the Chair, Councillor Brooke.
Thank you very much. Clerk, do we have any apologies or updates to the membership of the committee?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Going to minutes for the December 9th, 2024. Is there a proposer for them being correct? Thank you. Councillor Billings, seconder. Councillor Strang, thank you. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. On to declarations of interest. Do any members of the Planning Committee have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on any of the items on today's agenda? Please raise your hand. Councillor Billings.
Chair, I'll just declare an interest as a member of the Neighbourhood Forum for Brixham in relation to item 1 on the agenda, as a member that prepared the plan that's referred to in the officer report. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. And do any officers have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on any of the items of today's meeting? Thank you. Any urgent items?
No, Chair.
Marvellous. So we will now move into item 5. We've got a full committee meeting today. This item is to consider an application for land of St Mary's Road in Brixham, reference P2023-0553. The clerk has confirmed who has registered to speak upon entry to the meeting. I therefore ask Miss Emily Elliott to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of an update before I begin, the Climate Emergency Officer for the Council has provided a response stating that the proposal is disappointing from an embodied carbon perspective, however, recommends a planning condition should planning permission be approved relating to low carbon and sustainability measures. I'll now begin my presentation. So the application before you is land off St Mary's Road in Brixham. The application seeks full planning permission for the demolition of the existing industrial buildings on site and the erection of 28 residential dwellings, 22 of which will be open market and 6 will be affordable, together with access, landscaping and associated works. The application site is off land off St Mary's Road, which, if it will help members, I will just use the laser a second. So St Mary's Road runs along here, so it runs in between the two parcels. And then we have Upton Manor Park, which is the road above, which today on our committee site visits we went along. So the application site measures approximately 0.54 hectares. The northern buildings are known as St Mary's Industrial Estate, which are located within the South Devon National Landscape, so it's this top parcels within the National Landscape, whilst the buildings to the south are known as the Old Dairy, which abut the National Landscape designation. The site contains several buildings in both parcels, as we saw on our committee site visit today. And then here is an aerial imagery. So again, it's highlighting the two areas, the northern parcel and the southern parcel. The site is allocated in the Brixham Peninsula Neighbourhood Plan as a housing site for 25 units. The site's located within the Brixham Peninsula Strategic Delivery Area, and the site is also close to the Berry Head South Hams Greater Horseshoe Bat Special Area of Conservation and is within the sustenance zone for such. The application site is also within the Cyril Bunting Consultation Zone. It's designated as Flood Zone 1, and there is a group tree preservation order north of the application site. So just to provide context for those who were unable to make the site visit today, so to the south of the southern parcel all around here, Springdale Close, is residential development. Further over to the east we have a holiday park. And then over to the west of both the north and the south parcels, we have residential development, and to the north of the northern parcel too. And then the open countryside is east of the northern parcel, where my cursor's going now. This is an existing site layout. The existing buildings on site provide a rural gateway and former cultural heritage characteristic to the national landscape. The existing buildings are formed of traditional stone or block and render. Here are some of the existing elevations of the buildings which are on site. So we have a mixture of the northern and the southern parcels. And here are some existing sections of the site. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've got the reference of where those sections have been taken. And then we have the proposed site layout. So in the northern parcel of the application site, it's to be occupied by 13 residential units, which are in the form of flatted, detached, semi-detached and terrace development. The vehicular access would be from the northern side of St Mary's Road, and 20 allocated parking spaces are proposed, 1 per apartment, 2 per dwelling house and 1 visitor space. In the southern parcel of the application site, there would be 15 residential units, which are flatted, semi-detached or terrace development. The vehicular access would be from the southern side of St Mary's Road, and 24 allocated parking spaces are proposed. Again, 1 per apartment, 2 per dwelling house, and then 4 visitor spaces, 6 of which are included within integral garages and 8 of which are in the Undercroft parking area. And just to point out where that is, the integral garages are in this area within the townhouses. And then the Undercroft parking is in this other corner here. Across the proposed development, the residential units vary in 2 to 3 stories in height. The proposed design incorporates a variety of gabled and hipped roofscapes. The proposed material palette includes natural stone, vertical timber cladding, standing seam metal cladding and natural slate roofs, as well as metal fenestrations, balconies and rainwater goods. And then in terms of proposed elevations, there are several slides coming up, so I will just give you a few seconds on each one. So this is units 1 to 7 in the northern parcel on the corner. This is unit 8, also to be included within the northern parcel, a detached dwelling. The next one is units 9 to 10, which is a pair of semi-detached properties in the northern parcel. Then we have units 11 to 13, which is a small group of terrace properties, again in the northern parcel. And then when we cross over St Mary's Road into the southern parcel, then is presented units 14 and 15, which are a pair of semi-detached properties. And then we've got units 16 to 25 in the southern parcel, which is a flatted form of development. And then we have finally units 26 to 28, which is a terrace of townhouses in the southern parcel too. Here before you are some proposed sections, and again in the bottom right hand corner we've got where the sections are taken from. Sorry, it's probably appearing very small, but hopefully that will help kind of understand what the existing buildings versus the proposed buildings would look like. And then in terms of visualisations, the agent has provided a number of these. So from our site visit today, where we started on Upton Manor Park, this is the view down St Mary's Road. So the northern parcel is on the left hand side and the southern parcel is appearing on the right hand side just behind the road sign, the wayfinding sign. And then we have a view from the southern parcel looking towards the northern parcel where the new access would be within the northern section. So we've got the edge of units 1 to 7 on the left hand side, and then we have units 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 on the right hand side. We now have a view when we walked further between the site and we were walking further up St Mary's Road towards Orchard House. So this is the view from there looking back down St Mary's Road up towards Upton Manor Park. So we've got the southern parcel on the left hand side and the northern parcel on the right hand side. And then we've also got a final visualisation of looking from the northern parcel into the southern parcel. So the right hand is the large flatted development block, and on the left hand side you can see a little bit of one of the semi-detached properties, and then in the back we've got the vertical black timber cladding of the terraced townhouses. And again, here's some of the aerial visualisations, so it's providing more of a bird's eye view of the proposal in the context of the existing surrounding area. So just to kind of give us some points today, when we walked along, we kind of stopped roughly where my laser pointer is now, and then to familiarise ourselves, Orchard House is this big property up on top of the elevated position. Springdale Close runs along the edge of the southern parcel up here. And there's a few different orientations here. So this is a better view of the access up to Springdale Close up here. And you can see the holiday park, for example, in the background. There's the southeast perspective. And there's the southwest perspective. For those of you that were unable to attend today, I have taken some of these photographs that hopefully will assist you. So this is looking east from Upton Manor Park. So it's relating back to that first visualisation again, if you can remember from a few seconds ago. So the left-hand side here is the northern parcel, and then over here we've got the southern parcel. This is from the southern parcel looking to the northern parcel. So you can see the traditional stone buildings. And then this is literally the next photograph taken along. So this is some extensions and alterations that have happened to the site over time, again taken from the southern parcel looking north. And then this is the edge of the application site. So this is looking at the edge of the northern, the southern parcel. And there's just another picture as well for context. Oh, and one more. And then there's a key view looking down from St Mary's Road, looking down towards the application site. So, in terms of key issues and material considerations, the policies relating to housing development, the site is allocated under the neighbourhood plan as a housing site for 25 units, known as St Mary's, the Old Dairy, which covers the area of the existing buildings in both the north and south of the parcel shown before you. The application site is brownfield in nature. The neighbourhood plan supports and encourages residential development on brownfield sites in preference to greenfield sites, subject to compliance with other policies contained within the neighbourhood plan. There is a pressing need for housing in Torbay, and the site is allocated for housing in the development plan. Accordingly, the presumption in favour of sustainable development is applied to applications involving the provision of housing. Under the presumption, permission should only be refused where either, firstly, the application of policies in the framework that protect the national landscape or designated heritage assets provides a strong reason for refusal, or, secondly, the impacts of approving a proposal would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the framework taken as a whole, having particular regard to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places, and providing affordable homes, individually or in combination. Development plan policies are taken into account when assessing whether the harm caused would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefit. For reasons set out in the committee report, there is material harm to the South Devon national landscape contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework, notably paragraphs 187 and 189, which confirms such is a protected asset that presents a strong reason for refusing the application. There is also less than substantial harm to the setting of the Grade 2 listed building, which, apologies, I should have maybe pointed out on one of the slides before, but I can if you need me to later, whereby the public benefits of the proposal do not outweigh the identified harm. National landscapes and designated heritage assets are defined protected assets under paragraph 11, and given the harm to such, the policies in the framework which seek to protect the protected areas of particular importance provide a strong reason for refusing the development. The tilted balance aspect of the presumption in favour of sustainable development at paragraph 11 of the framework therefore does not need to be applied. It is noted that footnote 9 and paragraph 11 draw particular attention to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, providing effective use of land, securing well-designed places and providing affordable homes. Whilst these considerations may also pull in different directions, the proposal presents significant and demonstrable conflict with the objective of securing well-designed places. Secondly, the South Devon national landscape. The northern parcel of the application site is located within the national landscape. In accordance with paragraph 189 of the NPPF, great weight should be given to conserving and enhancing landscape and scenic beauty of designated areas, including national landscapes, which have the highest status of protection. The application site serves strongly as a gateway to the South Devon national landscape. Consideration must be given as to whether the proposed development in the northern parcel of the site would be considered major development within the national landscape. For reasons contained within the committee report, and the application site on this parcel only containing 13 units, it's considered that it would not constitute major development within the national landscape. The proposal involves the total demolition of the existing traditional historic buildings which offer a wealth of historic features and cultural associations. The proposal would remove the special quality of the national landscape. The existing buildings provide a rural character and gateway into the national landscape as it transitions from town into countryside. Whilst the applicant proposes to reclaim the stone from the non-designated heritage assets, the vernacular details and historic legacy of the non-designated heritage assets would be permanently lost. The Council employed Devon County Council to review the supporting landscape and visual impact assessment. The officer has concluded that the proposed demolition of the non-designated heritage assets would result in permanent harm to the historic character of the area and rich time depth of the South Devon national landscape, and that insufficient information had been provided to justify why the non-designated heritage assets, which are of historic interest, cannot be included or repurposed as part of the proposed development. The Council structural engineer has commented that the supporting documents to demolish the existing buildings are on a speculative basis and provide little to no justification or evidence to substantiate statements. The harm identified by Devon County Council's landscape officer should be given great weight in the planning balance when weighing against the benefits of the scheme, as per paragraph 189 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Given the proposed development, particularly in relation to the loss of the existing traditional stone buildings and its location within and adjacent to the national landscape, it's considered that the proposed development would result in permanent harm to the historic character of the area and the rich time depth of the national landscape, as it fails to conserve and enhance such. In terms of design, visual appearance and the character of the area, the application was submitted without any pre-application inquiry or attendance of the design review panel. The application sites comprise of existing built form in a way of a mixture of 1, 2 and 3 storey period stone and render commercial buildings with areas of hard standing, as you saw in your site visit today. The application site had previously formed part of the wider Upton Manor Farm site, whereby the planning inspector had considered that the existing traditional stone buildings offer a significant contribution to the character of the area. The revisions throughout the lifetime of the application have not reduced the height or scale of the proposed development. It is considered that the proposal fails to acknowledge the local character and destroys the rural gateway. The proposal in totality, given its siting scale and design, would fail to integrate within the existing street scene and does not positively enhance the built environment. Whilst the existing buildings particularly dominate the southern section of the site in terms of footprint, the buildings respond to the changes in level, whereas the proposal would provide a stark difference. The proposal would remove the rural gateway to the national landscape and would therefore cause harm. The proposed development in terms of height would be at prevailing odds with the surrounding area. It's considered that the proposed scale would not respect or enhance the local character and would fail to relate to the surrounding built environment in terms of height. In terms of impact on designated and non-designated heritage assets, the application site contains a number of non-designated heritage assets, and there is a Grade 2 listed building located approximately 20 metres to the northwest of the application site. This is known as 1, 2 and 3 St Mary's Road. The Council's Principal Historic Environment Officer has outlined that both the northern and southern groups of buildings, the stone boundary wall along St Mary's Road and potentially other structures associated with the former agricultural industrial use of the site could be classed as non-designated heritage assets. The total demolition and clearance of the site would cause substantial harm through complete loss of significance to the historic buildings and their historic relationship with each other in the wider landscape. The proposed development lacks convincing justification and would therefore be contrary to the requirements of paragraph 213 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The impact of the proposed development would result in an adverse change within its setting and would therefore cause a low degree of less than substantial harm to the significance of the designated heritage asset, that being 1, 2 and 3 St Mary's Road. Impacts on residential amenity. The proposed development is considered to have a usable layout for all day-to-day needs, adequate light and outlook, and private outside amenity spaces. The submitted information fails to demonstrate or provide certainty that the proposal would provide an acceptable relationship to adjacent neighbouring properties on Springdale Close. It is considered that the proposal the proposal would result in a layout that may result in overlooking intervisibility issues between future occupiers and Orchard Way. The proposal would also result in an overbearing and overtly dominant impact on the existing properties on Springdale Close. In terms of impact on highway safety, the application site is located on the northern and southern flanks of St Mary's Road, which is an adopted public highway. St Mary's Road varies in width between 2.8 metres to 4.5 metres with limited street lighting and no footway provision as we experienced today on site. The proposed development would result in a minor increase in trip generation, but the Highway Authority have stated that it would have a negligible impact on the operation and safety of the local highway network. Adequate visibility displays and manoeuvrability have been provided. it's considered that the proposal would provide the requisite quantum of parking spaces that meet the required standards. In terms of impact on trees, that, as mentioned before, there's a group tree preservation order to the north of the application site. Swissco Senior Tree Officer satisfied with the supporting information, and the application site is constrained by scale and layout with regards to opportunities for structural planting. In terms of impact on ecology and biodiversity, the site is close to the Berryhead South Hams Greater Horseshoe Bat Special Area of Conservation and is within the sustenance zone. In the absence of the legal agreement to secure the mitigation, it's deemed that the development could have a likely significant effect on the South Hams Special Area of Conservation due to the recreational impacts on the calcareous grasslands. Given the recommendation, a legal agreement to secure the mitigation has not been furthered with the applicant. In terms of biodiversity net gain, it's mandatory from the 12th of February 2024 under the Town and Country Planning Act and the Environment Act for major developments. The application was received and validated prior to biodiversity net gain becoming mandatory in England, and therefore the development is deemed exempt from having to deliver the 10% gain in biodiversity. Instead, it would default to providing a gain, i.e. 1%. In terms of impact on flood risk and drainage, the site is within flood zone 1 and the Torbay-wide critical drainage area. The proposed drainage strategy would adequately manage surface water and present no risk of flooding from the critical 1 in 100-year storm event, plus 50% for climate change and 10% for urban creep. The Council's drainage engineer raises no objections. Affordable housing contributions. The proposal falls within the threshold for affordable housing contributions as outlined within Policy H2 of the local plan, which seeks affordable housing contributions on brownfield sites of 15 or more dwellings. The proposal seeks to provide 6 affordable residential units in the form of 2 one-bedroom apartments and 4 two-bedroom apartments. This would present a 21.4% affordable housing provision on site. In the absence of a legal agreement to secure the affordable housing provision, it's considered that such would constitute a reason for refusal. In terms of designing out crime, the proposal does not include a scheme of designing out crime, but if approved, a planning condition is recommended to secure such prior to the occupation of the development. And in terms of low carbon development and energy, as given in the update earlier, the Council's Climate Emergency Officer has reviewed the submission, stating that from an embodied carbon perspective, it's disappointing to see the request for demolition. However, the supporting information provides various sustainability and low carbon development measures, which should be secured via planning condition if minded to approve. There's the list of the development plan policies. And then for the officer recommendation, the recommendation is one of refusal, subject to the reasons as outlined in the committee report, with the final drafting of reasons delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, and the resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following Planning Committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further reasons. If members of Planning Committee are minded to approve the application against the officer recommendation, the final drafting of the planning conditions will be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency and in consultation with the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Elliott. I now call Mr Justin Dodge to address the meeting in support of the application. Mr Dodge, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. My name is Justin Dodge and I am the applicant. I do not agree with the planning officer's report and recommendation, which are heavily biased in favour of refusal. This application has been running for 18 months and in that time we have worked tirelessly to refine the design. We have now reached an impasse and we are no further forward than we were a year ago. There are a number of statements in the report which are disingenuous or deliberately misleading, such as on page 72 where it states revisions throughout the lifetime of this application have not reduced the height or scale of the proposed development. We have. One of the design changes removed an entire storey from the front corner of the site and reduced the eaves height by more than 2 metres. This significantly changed the height and scale of the building in the street scene. This was recognised by Brixham Town Council, who withdrew their objection following the changes. Fundamentally, as the policy officer recognises, this is a brownfield site which is allocated for residential redevelopment. As everyone here is aware, we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and the government have made housing a key priority with a focus on delivery, particularly on brownfield sites. Torbay are nowhere near a 5-year housing land supply, and with recent changes to the NPPF, that requirement has been greatly exacerbated. The delivery of housing, and particularly affordable housing, carries significant weight. Despite the officer's interpretation, it is clear that the tilted balance will apply because of the massive requirement for new housing in Torbay. Torbay's policy officer states that the starting point for an allocated site would be to approve the application, and changes to the NPPF now require a strong reason for refusal. There is no way that the issues raised within the officer's report constitute a strong reason. Anyone who has visited the site will appreciate that it is in a terrible state. It could not continue as a commercial site as the existing buildings are so dilapidated. It is a vacant site and has been for some time, and even to the untrained eye, the existing site and buildings are an eyesore and considerably detract from the area. I don't know what more we can do. Whilst it may be technically feasible to retain and reuse almost any structure, we know it is not viable here. Making new homes fit within existing walls, working with and retaining existing structures is very challenging and cannot achieve the NHBC standards required for new homes. The cost of conversion is astronomical, which will erode the viability of the scheme, inevitably resulting in a reduction of affordable housing. There is no way we can produce a policy-compliant scheme whilst retaining existing structures. Furthermore, the removal of the buildings on the corner of St Mary's Road enables the existing highway to be significantly improved. At present, all traffic, including buses, have to drive onto the wrong side of the road to turn the corner. This is a significant improvement which has been totally overlooked. That cannot be achieved if the existing buildings are retained, as they are actually in the road. The buildings are not listed. Their status has been massively overstated. The existing structures have been so significantly modified for commercial use, they are very challenging to convert. There are many examples of similar former agricultural barns across the region. They are not unique. This is not a strong reason to withhold permission. It should be noted that all the housing behind our site and the South Bay Holiday Park, consisting of a sea of metal-clad static mobile homes, is all within the AONB. It is consistently stated that our site will form the gateway to the headland, but that fundamentally disregards the existing surrounding context and
1 minute remaining.
And the state of the existing site. Both the Historic Environment and Landscape Officers state that they would like to see the existing non-designated heritage assets retained. But, importantly, they also state that if they cannot be retained, they did provide us with a schedule of suitable planning conditions that could enable the application to be approved, and we are content to accept those conditions should you be minded to approve this application. We urge you to overturn this officer recommendation. The site is allocated for housing. It currently lies empty as an eyesore and a health and safety hazard. The high quality and sensitive redevelopment of this site for much needed housing and affordable housing will inevitably greatly enhance the area. Thank you, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dodge. We have no other speakers, so I'm very sorry that unless you're registered to speak, you cannot speak. No, that's just the way it has to work. So sorry, sir.
How do I become registered? I am new to all this.
Yeah.
At what point do I have to? At what point can I be in that man's shoes to have a word?
Well,
because I am part of the public, right?
Yeah, thank you. But right at this moment, though, I need to ask you to stop speaking. But we can talk afterwards, and you can find out at a later date. Thank you. Thank you. Right, committee members, now invite questions to the planning officer. Please may I remind members, questions should only cover matters not raised in the presentation. Any members wish to ask questions? Thank you. I will open up the... Sorry, Councillor Billings, didn't see.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if the officer had any comments on the observation that was made about height. We heard from the applicant that the proposals, in their view, were reduced in height and were evolved through the process to become acceptable. I'm just wondering if you'd got any comment back in relation to that, over and above what's in your report, which was very clear when I read it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. There has been some reduction, for example, in the flatted development in the southern parcel, on that corner where we have units, I think 16 to 25. There has been a reduction in the height of the proposal where it looks on towards the bungalows on Springdale Close. But I've thoroughly measured the original drawings versus the new drawings and have provided you with the commentary in the committee report.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard about non-designated heritage designations, and clearly we have one or a number here. In relation to the MPPF and paragraph 216, I wonder if the Council could summarise the steps that have been taken either by the Council itself or by the applicants to accord with the exhortation within that paragraph of national policy.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Hopefully it was detailed sufficiently within the committee report. However, we have got the Council's Principal Historic Environment Officer, if you wish for him to provide any further commentary.
Thank you for that. That will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. So in regards to paragraph 216...
Sorry, one moment. Can you introduce yourself so people know who you are?
Sorry,
and
of course. Yeah, I went straight in there. I am Rob Palmer, Principal Historic Environment Officer. So what I did when assessing this is assessing, number one, is it a non-designated heritage asset? Both myself, the landscapes officer, and also the submission within the application from their heritage specialist agreed that they were non-designated heritage assets. Then you have to assess what impact the proposals would have on them as non-designated heritage assets. It's quite a simple impact in this regard, in that wholesale demolition is total loss. So when you are looking at the impact on significance of those as we call them NDHAs, you are looking at substantial harm through total loss of the heritage asset there. I believe that subsequent to that further justification was sought with regards to the loss of those structures. I believe that and the case officer may want to kind of comment further on this, that a structural assessment was sought. I think an assessment of sorts was provided, but was then assessed by our in-house structural engineer, and I believe within the presentation the case officer described their response to that, that was inadequate to justify loss. And then we heard in regards to viability as well. I don't believe there is a viability assessment associated with the application. I'm happy to be corrected on that, and as I said, case officer may want to comment further. But usually in the matters of wholesale loss, you would look for a structural assessment and also a viability assessment to inform that justification for loss. So we are left with that as a position, and my advice to the case officer was that we do have substantial harm without clear justification. Thank you.
If I could just expand on that. I listened to the applicant, and one of the lines was, I don't know what more we could do, it's not viable, but can you confirm on this viability issue? Because as far as I've read, and if I've missed something, apologies, but I couldn't see any statement on viability.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. In terms of the submission, the applicant did provide a statement that they produced themselves titled Conversion versus New Build Viability in November 2023, which basically outlines that they don't consider the buildings can remain on site. This hasn't been assessed by an independent viability expert because there are no figures or anything provided within that document.
Thank you. Councillor Billings.
Sorry, Chair. A question for the officer and also possibly one of her colleagues relating to the comment on page 31. We talk about whether the section from the housing site assessments got the full force of section 38.6, i.e. whether it's considered part of the development plan. Now, the neighbourhood plan, when it was submitted, was rather unusual, and it said that all 10 documents, this is one of the 10, were part of the submitted plan. So I just wonder whether, on further analysis, that we still think that comment's appropriate. But I wonder if the officer could talk me through, bearing in mind there's this comment in the housing site assessment that suggests development could come forward either one way, which was a conversion, or another way, which was demolition and new build to make more efficient use of land. What would be the appropriate expectation to come forward in the way that's proposed, i.e. demolition and new build, please? What would be appropriate in the context?
I think if the application had been supported with appropriate and sufficient evidence and justification for the demolition of the buildings that was undertaken by, for example, a suitably qualified structural engineer that could confirm that the buildings, if they are or are not in a state of disrepair, to be either converted or if they did need to be demolished, would have assisted. As I've mentioned within the committee report, the allocation doesn't mention whether or not the building should or should not be retained, but in the absence of adequate justification and evidence, that's how I've come to the recommendation I have.
Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions, members? So I'll open up the application for debate, colleagues. No? Councillor Bentley, yeah.
For the sake of someone to say something, I know I wasn't able to make the site visits today, but I did look over the weekend. I travelled across. It is really difficult because we've had a few kind of applications of this type where something's come along, and in this case, housing that looks potential, and the big elephant in the room is the housing crisis. And I honestly don't know what I'm going to do with this yet. I mean, the failure in relation to local policy H2, i.e. affordable housing, that does stick out as the most problematic part for me. But yeah, I'll stop there because I am keen to hear from others because I am generally, still mulling this one over.
Councillor Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a similar sort of vein, I've looked at all this, and it is difficult because it ticks some boxes in that it is on a brownfield site. It is area that has been allocated for housing, and we are so desperate for housing. But then on the other hand, I do understand the heritage. You know, we need to keep that. So, like Councillor Pentney, I'm quite, you know, torn on this one, and, you know, I'm mulling it over. Thank you.
Councillor Talshard.
Thank you, Chair. I think this probably is one of those that is extremely difficult for us. I am the ward member in which the site sits, and I am very familiar with it. The impact currently on the surroundings is not a good one. I would absolutely acknowledge that because of the condition of the buildings there, and we recognise that the site is a brownfield site designated for housing, and I think we probably all recognise that development there is needed. I think it's disappointing that there hasn't been enough consideration of retaining at least some of the buildings which are there, and probably even more disappointing that the proposal for complete demolition sort of has not been supported by enough facts and figures to assure us that none of them can be retained. So I think that's probably is a real sticking point for us, and we all recognise the need for housing and affordable housing, and it is ripe for development. So I think it is disappointing that we haven't got probably the supporting information that we all would have liked, and I think has probably been requested throughout the months of negotiation. That's what I've got to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Billings.
If the committee thinks back to what it did in relation to an application in Torquay, where we'd got a non-designated heritage asset, we required a substantial amount of information in order to justify the demolition of that building, in order to allow the site to come forward for other dwellings. Now, it seems to me there's a benefit in decisions being consistent, and I think the committee outlined reasonably clearly what it expected in that case, and one may propose that therefore there's a reasonable expectation that that should apply in this. In terms of the actual proposal itself, where I've found myself looking at is the as existing site survey and the as proposed site layout plan, which if you zoom into the drawings very a large degree, you can see the heights written on them. And what I've noticed is that at various points, and this is subject to a degree of sort of interpretation, because you've got to choose where to look from, but some of the height increases on the is it the southern side? Yeah, the southern side were very substantial. Now, it's not clear to me, and what would have assisted my assessment of the proposals would have been a much clearer explanation of the design evolution as to why we'd got to the proposal that we're looking at, and that would have enabled me to be a lot more comfortable about the height increases proposed, which I wasn't able to find in the information submitted, which would have helped some of this and would have helped me bridge the impasse between what we've heard the applicant speak about and what we've heard our officers speak about. Be interested to see what other members thought.
Councillor Strang.
When we were on site there, and especially on the Springdale close side, and on St Mary's, on that southern parcel of land, I did feel that the buildings, as we could read them from the drawings, felt quite imposing over the surrounding area. So I'm quite concerned that that's the case for the surrounding residents.
I think in putting some of my observations in that, you know, the first 2 points of refusal are basically about the demolition of all the buildings, and I have to admit I was and still am disappointed that we have not been given the evidence-based information, clear structural reports that the demolition actually is needed, and also the lack of figure work on the viability, which leaves us in a very onerous position. And without evidence and without data, it leaves us almost impossible to go one way rather than another.
Thank you, Chair. And picking up on those comments and those comments of Councillor Billings, as a former chairman of this committee, deferral is a bit of a dirty word for me, because I don't like it being you, or who cares what I think, but like in terms of it's not good form to use it as a means to dodge a tricky decision, but it is useful in those cases where we can identify what we believe to be gaps in the report or gaps in the data that we think a deferral decision would achieve us in securing to better inform a future decision on this. So I'll just chuck that out there, because you both identified those, what we might call gaps in the report, and I'd be interested to hear from both of you, because you identified those gaps, and whether we believe that a deferral would be able to see us secure those missing pieces.
Councillor Billings.
I think I'm not sure that I think that that would be a helpful way forward, because if we took the view that that would be a useful way forward on this application, how many other applications are we applying that for? Where do you draw the line? Does that allow our officers to bring certainty to this committee so we've got something useful to progress? To me, I'm not clear that would help, because if I was thinking it through, the sort of going away and coming back with the sort of information this committee considered was appropriate on another application for this application, well, what's been the justification in the use of this meeting, the investment and the time that's got us here? And there's several different categories where that would have assisted. It starts on, for example, the rationale for the demolition as opposed to conversion. And then I think it goes more broadly into the rationale for the layout, bearing in mind what we've got here is, in certain points, is imposing. Now, I'm not necessarily persuaded in my mind when I first looked at that was unacceptable, but I didn't find the quality of the justification that would have led me to have concluded it was okay, which is a really frustrating position to be in, having explained when I sort of provided the disclosure of interest at the beginning that I was part of the forum that allocated this site in the first place. So this should really, from my perspective, have been, oh, that's what we expected to come forward, great, there's an application forward on the site that the group had previously marked up, and yet we're not there. And I think, therefore, to me, it's a deferral to provide one piece of information, Chair. I'm not quite sure that that's taking me that much further forward.
Thank you, Councillor Billings.
I don't want to interrupt your debate, but just sort of setting that position straight, we heard from the speaker that it's been an elongated process in terms of the sequence. We've got, you know, an application submitted without pre-application inquiry or Torbay Design Review Panel. There was a piece of information, the application was submitted, we took it to committee, it was deferred to make those negotiation changes. We built those up through an information exchange, both parties working tirelessly, it's a fairly good description used by the speaker, to get to a point where we were unable to recommend approval, and we've asked for further information that hasn't been provided, and the applicant agent's clear that they want a decision. So I'm not sure deferral is the right route, but you have all the information before you and a clear committee report that sets out that pathway and those reasons. So thank you.
I think also we've covered the demolition issue of refusal, but there hasn't been any conversation about the impact to the neighbours. You know, and when I was on the site, one could clearly see that what was being proposed could have a significant effect, in my mind, with the neighbours. And, you know, we have to bear these things in mind. If, you know, my view is you make a design that you can cover off all problems. You know, I was quite surprised, and I hadn't realised as much how much backwards and forwards have been going on over the last 8 months. So I'm not in a position where I'd be happy with a deferral. I think as a committee we make firm decisions, we follow them on the basis of our other decisions, and actually that gives clarity to all involved and for future applicants as well. Councillor Penny.
I mean, I'm going to obviously thank you for clarifying that, and like I said, I wasn't necessarily advocating deferral myself, but you had both identified things that you'd like to see, but I take your point in terms of how far do you go with that in any application that we're considering. Yes, we should be consistent in the way we approach applications, and Councillor Billings, you cited an earlier example, but I think there are significant differences between that case where I don't think we're bound by our own precedent in respect to, I believe it's the old hotel site you were referring to. I think it is worth pointing out, I know there are 45 letters of objection received, but when we're applying a balance of policies, I think it is relevant to note that there wasn't any speakers here to speak against, and the room is empty. And whilst I know, Torquay isn't always the easiest place to get to if you're on that side of the bay, I'm sure that amenity concerns of some neighbours, if they are really felt kind of deeply, we would see more of that here today. And so I think in the way we proceed, we should bear that in mind in terms of, is the strength of feeling around those concerns on the neighbourhood area so pronounced when we have had no speakers having the opportunity to speak against, where in other comparable applications, yourself, Chair, would be using your Chairman's discretion to allow for multiple anti-speakers where we haven't actually had one. And I think that is a relevant consideration for us in making our decision.
Yeah, I think, Chair, that is a very interesting point that Councillor Pentley raises. We have heard from more people in this room on a single dwelling, I think, going back, which puts it in stark context for me. It would have helped, though, if I'd got more, and I'll just use an example. So we walked up Springdale Close, and doing the best I can, looking at the existing site layout plan and the topo that was done. The ridge is 63.8, and the ridge of what's proposed is 66.4. So 2.5 metres taller, give or take. Do I think that will be impactful on the dwellings opposite? It will have an impact. It would be useful if there was some explanation to talk me through the journey about why that was considered appropriate. Use another example. To the ridge of, if we were to stand on the St Mary's Road and look south, the ridge of the roof of the unit on the left-hand side as you look at it of the parcel on the right-hand side of the access, the ridge is 67.38. Doing the best I can, trying to find a similar point. The ridge at the moment is 65.87. So, again, about 2 metres high. So, this is quite a bit more bulky than it was. Equally, we've got an expectation to make the best use of land. The speaker earlier pointed out is brownfield. It is that balancing act. To me, I would really have liked a little bit more explanation as to why this, and that's before we started the going through the process of saying, well, it would have been helpful to have had consistency of the sort of information to justify the demolition that we'd had on other things. That would have helped the way I'm looking at it. As I say, I think you could find this. I think you can make a case of it both ways, but that sort of extra information, which is the sort of thing that would come up through the pre-app process, would have assisted. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Fox.
On a different tack altogether, obviously the elephant in the room perhaps is the need for housing, the desperate need for housing in Brixham and in Torbay as a whole. I just wonder if it would be helpful if one of the officers could just talk us briefly through why this site is so important in relation to affordable housing, so we get that in the balance with everything else. I don't know if Mr. Pickhaver can help us out on that. Sorry, David.
David, if you can introduce yourself when you speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm David Pickhaver. I'm a Principal Policy Officer for Torbay Council. My views have been set out in the report to the extent that Torbay has to apply the presumption in favour of sustainable development because of the operation of the housing delivery test. We've at the moment got around 2.69 years housing land supply, but when we actually calculate the new MPPF housing requirement on Torbay, the number will fall probably to about 1.7 years. So we have to give, and as has been set out in the report, substantial weight does need to be given to the provision of housing. There's also a significant need for affordable housing, which does also need to be given substantial weight in the planning balance. The need for affordable homes across Torbay is something like 700 affordable homes per year, of which just over that is affordable homes for rent, and that does need to be given weight. But as has been set out in both my comments and Ms Elliott's report, this application does also raise other issues such as the impact on national landscape, heritage issues that need to be taken into account in that balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pickhaver. Councillor Strang.
I obviously note Councillor Pentley's comment about resident engagement in the meeting, and I just wonder whether the residents that were strongly against have seen the officer report and took comfort in that rather than needing to come and actually speak as a possible reason for no representation on that argument, because I certainly had a lot of representation against.
Thank you, Councillor Strang. Councillor Penny.
Sorry, very quickly, Chair, just to pick up on that point. From my experience, and with all respect, Councillor Strang, in my long experience, I think I'm the longest serving member, continuous member of this committee, that's the officer recommendation has never usually, beyond a nominal level, impacted the attendance on these things, even when it's been for or against as per the general will. It's never impacted on attendance, just from my own experience anyway.
Councillor Tolshard.
I mean, just picking up on Mr Pickhaver's report, we all recognise the desperate need for affordable housing, and the provision here would be extraordinarily helpful, as you know, as would the marketable dwellings as well. I think that's not in question at all. But what is in question is whether the development is quite right as it is presented to us today. And as I said before, the lack of justification for certain aspects of the proposals is disappointing and doesn't really help. And also the sort of deferral, this has gone on for an extremely long time. We've already had this proposal, or the one which has been slightly amended, was, to use that word, deferred. It hasn't come to us before, and we are still in a position of finding it difficult to make a decision. So I'm sad that we're actually in this position this afternoon, to be perfectly honest, when I think we do all recognise that the right development there is badly needed for all sorts of reasons, for the aesthetics of the area, the provision of housing, and so it is very disappointing that we are where we are this afternoon, but I don't think that deferral would help us, and very quickly. It is disappointing that we haven't got people speaking. There is very strong feelings generated by any proposed development in this area, but so it is disappointing, as I say, that we haven't got someone here. I suspect that probably what Councillor Strang says, despite what Councillor Pentley says, I suspect that those people who have been fairly vociferous in the past saw the recommendation for refusal, and for whatever their reasons haven't come this afternoon, but that is also disappointing and surprising, I have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Billings.
I think actually, Chair, particularly saying as I sort of was endorsing what Councillor Pentley was saying earlier, I think if you read the officer's report as a whole, I think the average local resident would probably not necessarily have in their forefront of their mind the huge need to come here and add to what's a very comprehensive amount of assessment. I think perhaps it's probably realistic to expect that if the recommendation of it another way, we might have had greater attendance in the room. But to me, I don't think we should give that too much weight. It's one thing, and I think realistic, sort of turning back to what's in the officer report and turning back to some of the key policy aspects. When this committee has previously refused an application, it was the example I was giving earlier. I don't think the fact that there was a huge weight, indeed there actually wasn't much weight of evidence from the public at all in that case. That wasn't sort of the strongest points. I think what we were looking at were planning reasons, and I think that's what we've got to here. And we've got this issue about balancing, as I see it, the pressing need to deliver housing, including affordable housing, which this proposal does well. It's an allocated brownfield site for 25. This is a scheme for 28. Sort of so far so good. And then we've got to compare that with the lack of information to justify the demolition of the non-designated heritage asset, and the clearance of the site and a new build versus the conversion, and also whether the very specific proposals we've got on this in the way that new buildings should come forward is damaging or harmful to the landscape and the national landscape which is adjacent. I think what's clear is the fact that this discussion is perhaps so stilted is that that's a fine balance, Chair. Often in applications, members are much more sort of coming forward. I think the fact that this discussion is quite slow at times is recognising all members are balancing that in the same way that the officers had to. I don't think we should get too hung up on other things. I think those are the key ones, Chair.
Well, colleagues, we've battered this backwards and forwards, I think. We've got a recommendation for refusal on 5 points. Do we have a proposer for recommend a refusal? Thank you, Councillor Tolchard. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Verdi, seconder. If there's no more debate on the proposal, so I'll do a vote. Those in favour of refusal? Just make sure.
5 in favour.
Those against?
That's 3 against, Chair.
Thank you, then refusal is voted through. Thank you. So moving through to item number 6. You can. We'll take a 5-minute comfort break.
Right, comfort break over. Moving to item number 6, to consider an application for land off Pilgrim's Close, Brixham, reference P 2024-0562. Again, the clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting, so therefore ask Miss Emily Elliott again to introduce this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I promise this one will be a shorter presentation. In terms of updates, there is no updates to give with this application. The application is for land off Pilgrim Close in Brixham. The application seeks outline planning permission for up to 20 dwellings, including affordable housing at 25%, with all matters reserved apart from access. Matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping are therefore reserved for future consideration, with only indicative detail on these matters submitted as part of the current outline application. The application site is located to the south of Wall Park Road. I'll just get the little laser back up for you. So Wall Park Road runs along here, and the southwest of Pilgrim Close, which is here. So in between the two is Heritage Way running along here. The application site is at the northeastern edge of the built-up area of Brixham. And just to provide some context, also here is the Brixham Football Club, so it's kind of to the southwestern corner, and beyond that is the allotments. The site sits adjacent to residential development to the north, east and south. So as discussed, that Wall Park Road is older development, and then we've got the Blore development, which is the Heritage Way, Pilgrim Close, and it wraps all the way around here. And to the west of the site here, running along, it's not named, but that's Haycock Lane, and it's a private access road. The topography of the site has a gentle gradient towards the west, and for the most part of the site it's level, as we saw on our committee site visit today. So here's an aerial overview of it. So the site sits within the South Devon National Landscape. It's also within the Sustenance Zone and Landscape Connectivity Zone associated with the South Hams Greater Horseshoe Bat Special Area of Conservation. The site is within a mineral safeguarding area, the Brixham Peninsula Strategic Delivery Area, and within the Torbay Wide Critical Drainage Area. The neighbourhood plan places the application site outside of the settlement boundary, but the local plan does not designate it as open countryside. We've now got the existing site layout. So the site is bound on the northern boundary by a close bordered fence, the eastern and southern boundaries by an existing stone wall, and the western boundary by a hedgerow. And then again, so the Haycock Lane is up here, and where we were today on our committee site visit, we were somewhere over here. Now turning to the proposed layout, so I'll start with the indicative layout to begin with. So this is basically demonstrating what quantum of development it could have. So in terms of the broader outline proposals, it presents a potential layout that seeks to demonstrate the amount of development that could be achieved, and further detail is provided within the supporting design and access statement. But in terms of the details presented here, the following key parameters are that the housing is to be located throughout the site, offered in a mixture of detached, semi-detached and short terraces. The illustrative detail offers a variety of residential house types, providing from 2-bedroom homes all the way through to 4-bedroom homes. The scale of development would be suggested of 2 stories with a maximum height of 9 metres, which is typical from the properties we saw on Pilgrim Close, Heritage Way, for example, today. The parking is to be largely on plot with driveways and with electric charging facilities throughout. The architectural detailing is suggested to be complementary to the surrounding area in terms of similar materials, colours and tones. The surface water drainage is to be managed on site through a series of private soakaways and permeable paving to manage runoff from the domestic catchment, a separate highway soakaway to manage the runoff from the adopted highway. The existing trees and hedgerows will be retained and maintained where possible, and ecological mitigation is proposed for the existing badger set with a 10-metre exclusion zone for habitat protection. I should also point out that we've had negotiations with the applicant, and I'll just move the laser marker. So roughly in this location where I'm moving the laser now, I've recommended a planning condition to secure the active travel links, so this would ensure that pedestrians and cyclists, as well as emergency access vehicles, can access the site, and there will be a collapsible bollard to ensure that there's no unauthorised driving through Haycock Lane into this parcel of development. And then here you will see the proposed layout. So this is just basically demonstrating that the proposed access arrangement, which this is seeking consent for, is a continuation of what we've already seen out on site today. So we've got the 5.5 metre carriage width, and we've got the 2 metre wide footways either side, which the Highway Authority supports. For those that were unable to come out on site today, here's a couple of photographs. So this photo is taken more from the Haycock Lane side of the application site, looking down the 2 parcels of land. So you can see it's relatively flat. And this is a further one, just a bit further within the site. Again, this is now looking, the residential development you see around the edges is the former Bloor development of the 160 odd units that were approved a while ago. And then this one is looking back up towards the football, you can see the football stadium, sorry, the football club, and the roof, floodlights, apologies, over here, and other existing residential development beyond. In terms of key issues and material considerations, the principle of development, the application site is a greenfield site, which is currently laid to grass. The site is not within the neighbourhood plan's defined settlement boundaries, but whilst the site is outside, but adjacent to such, and is surrounded by residential development on 3 out of 4 of its flanks. It is surrounded by built form, which provides a clear separation and visual distinction from the surrounding countryside. And I think when we saw from our site visit today, that was clearly evident that you couldn't see the countryside beyond that. The proposal's for up to 20 residential units. The parcel is within the built-up area and the site is bounded by residential development. It is considered that the proposal does not constitute major development as per major development within the national landscape, and given Torbay's housing shortfall means that the National Planning Policy Framework's presumption in favour of sustainable development must be applied to housing applications. The presumption in favour of sustainable development indicates that planning permission should be granted unless one of the 2 circumstances applied, which I outlined in the previous presentation. Hopefully I don't need to run through again, but neither limb of paragraph 11D applies, and therefore the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies, and the tilted balance is therefore engaged. In terms of visual impact, including the impact upon the national landscape, layout and design, the proposal only seeks detailed consent for the proposed access. The submitted information does include an indicative proposed site layout and indicative detail within the design and access statement on the likely character and appearance of the development proposed. It's necessary to determine the likely visual impact and impact upon the South Devon national landscape and to determine whether the submitted detail provides sufficient comfort that the amount of development, which is up to 20 dwellings, could be appropriately achieved in terms of its layout, design and character. The site is laid to grass, as I've previously mentioned, and adjacent to urban development, which has rendered the site an enclave surrounded by such development. While the site does naturally have a sense of openness and spaciousness in its current undeveloped form, there are no public vantage points from which the site appears an intrinsic part of the wider national landscape. It's therefore considered that the proposal would not result in the loss of open countryside or create an urban sprawl, and the proposal is considered to provide sufficient comfort that the amount of development could be achieved on the site in terms of delivering a good residential standard in terms of buildings, parkings, external amenity spaces, etc. In terms of residential amenity, the development itself and the residential use aligns with the residential uses nearby, and the additional dwellings would not result upon undue noise or general disturbance for existing occupiers within the area. There are local shops, allotments and facilities within walking distances, and in terms of location of future occupier amenity alone, the site would present a suitable sustainable location. Whilst the application is supported by an indicative layout in terms of general outlooks and natural light levels, the layout presents a relatively open and well-spaced development that is likely to offer good levels of both matters. The footprints appear to present dwellings that would achieve or exceed national space standards, and the indicative external amenity spaces are largely generous within the layout and would comply with the expectation of 55 square metres of the local plan. It's considered that the amenity of the occupiers on Wall Park Road, Pilgrim Close, Regard Close and Leader Close would not be unduly impacted due to the likely separation distances. The proposal demonstrates the potential to provide a satisfactory form of development in terms of protecting the amenities of adjacent occupiers, but greater scrutiny on this will be undertaken at the reserve matters stage. Highways movement and parking. In terms of access, the application seeks detailed approval for a new vehicular access off Pilgrim Close. As mentioned before, the access presents a 5.5 metre wide carriageway into the site with 2 metre wide footways on both sides of the carriageway. The proposed access is considered acceptable and is considered to provide a suitable and safe access for the amount of development proposed, having the support of the local highway authority. The site is relatively sustainable in terms of travel and movement options, and as mentioned to you before, we have the 3.7 metre wide opening into the site boundary to allow pedestrian, cycle and emergency vehicle access only, with a collapsible bollard or similar physical measure to prohibit unauthorised use, which will help to promote sustainable travel. In terms of ecology, biodiversity and trees, the site sits within the sustenance zone associated with the Greater Horseshoe Bat Roost at Bury Head that forms part of the South Ham Special Area of Conservation and is within the zone of influence for recreational pressures upon the associated calcareous grasslands at Bury Head. To mitigate the impact of recreational pressures on the associated calcareous grasslands, a contribution is sought of £135 per dwelling. The proposal is also required to deliver the 10% gain in biodiversity, and Devon County Council's ecologist has confirmed that the proposal shows a gain in hedgerow units and an overall loss of habitats. Therefore, the purchase of off-site habitat units is required. The application site is not constrained by trees and landscaping and is a reserve matter that will be subject to future consideration. Flood risk and drainage. The site is within Flood Zone 1 and the Torbay Wide Critical Drainage Area. Again, the proposed drainage strategy for the submitted indicative layout would adequately manage surface water and present no risk of flooding. The Council's drainage engineer raises no objections. Low carbon development and climate change. A planning condition is recommended to secure in any reserve matters application relating to the proposal's layout, scale and appearance, details of energy efficiency measures and sustainable construction. And in terms of other material considerations, the application site is within a wider mineral safeguarding area. It's presented within the application that there are several constraints that would make mineral extraction within the application site unfeasible when considering the designation and the site's context within the national landscape. The benefits of housing are likely to outweigh the harm in terms of mineral safeguarding and is not considered a matter in itself that would outweigh the benefits of the housing land supply. In terms of sustainability, the economic and social benefits weigh in favour of the development, whilst the environmental factors weigh neutrally within the planning balance. As detailed within the committee report, the proposal is considered to therefore represent sustainable development. The committee report also details the local financial considerations relevant to this application, and in terms of the planning balance, it's considered that the scheme, in terms of addressing the development plan aspiration to provide housing, would produce a significantly positive impact overall and help with the supply of much needed housing. The impacts of the scheme are not unacceptable, subject to the planning conditions and obligations detailed within the committee report. Therefore, the proposals are considered to be in principle in accordance with the provisions of the development plan and demonstrate that an acceptable scheme could be accommodated on the site. The National Planning Policy Framework states that development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan should be approved without delay. Therefore, the officer recommendation is one of approval, subject to the planning conditions outlined in the committee report, with the final drafting of the planning conditions delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, the completion of a Section 106 agreement, and the resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following planning committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further planning conditions. If members of the planning committee are minded to refuse the application against the officer recommendation, final draftings of the reasons will be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency and in consultation with the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Elliott. I call Mr Matthew Bunt, who will be addressing the meeting in support of the application. Just to remind you, Mr Bunt, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. My name is Matthew Bunn. I'm a Chartered Town Planner at Thurlow Planning, and I'm speaking in support of the application on behalf of Northern Trust Land. We agree fully with the conclusions of the committee report provided by your officers, which recommends the application for approval, so I'll only focus on some of the key issues, including why this development is important for Torbay and more locally to residents in Brixham. The site's potential to deliver houses has been acknowledged by the Council previously, including in early local plan preparations and through the Council's granting of planning permission for 3 homes at part of the site in 2021. As you've heard, the site represents, the proposal represents the infilling of an existing gap within Brixham's urban area, largely created by the recently built out Wall Park development to the east, the existing houses on Wall Park Road. It will provide 15 market homes and 5 affordable homes in line with policy requirements. The enclosed nature of the site, combined with the number of homes proposed, means the proposal will not adversely affect the South Downs national landscape. Further, as you've heard in the officer's presentation, the proposal would not amount to development in the open countryside and would not lead to urban sprawl or the merging of any urban areas. From pre-application to application stage, we are pleased to have worked with officers to address matters, including providing further information and revised proposals relating to drainage, ecology and transport. The application benefits from support comments from key consultees, including highways, ecology, drainage, arboriculture and the Town Council. We engaged with the community before submitting the application, and while some comments of objection remain from members of the public, all of those are addressed within the officer's committee report. As you've heard, the proposal will gain access from the neighbouring Wall Park housing development via Heritage Way and Pilgrim Close. On the advice of the Highway Authority, a further opening is proposed on the southwestern side onto Haycock Lane, which will provide access for pedestrians and cyclists as well as emergency access. As the application is for outline planning permission, only an illustrative master plan has been provided. It demonstrates how the proposal can be delivered in an acceptable manner that will respect neighbours' residential amenity and provide a high quality living environment for future residents. Alongside the landscape, highway safety and neighbours' amenity, we have considered the proposal's impact on the environment from the outset. This has included undertaking ecological and tree surveys, which evidence that the proposal can be delivered without unacceptably impacting any important habitats, including for bats or badgers. The committee report recognises the significant benefits the development will deliver, and importantly does not identify any significant harms from the proposal. The development will deliver short and long-term economic benefits associated with construction, increased council tax receipts, local spending, and a community infrastructure levy payment. As you've heard, the most significant benefit of this development concerns the houses it will deliver. Members will be aware of the national housing crisis and the government's changes to the planning system, which are intended to boost the delivery of homes in England. And as we've heard already tonight, the Council acknowledges the district-wide shortfall in housing land supply. And more locally to Brixham, the Council's policy officer has also identified a pressing need to identify additional homes in Brixham, including affordable homes. Like many places, the delivery of affordable housing in the district is not meeting the identified need for affordable homes in Torbay. The development will in part help to address the identified shortfalls in both market and affordable housing, providing 15 homes to the open market and 5 affordable homes.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you for listening. As per your officer's advice, the development is consistent with the development plan and will deliver substantial benefits. We support and commend the officer's recommendation to approve this development subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement. We therefore respectfully request members to resolve to approve this application in accordance with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunt. Colleagues, we have no other speakers, so we can now open up for questions to the planning officer. And as usual, I'll just remind members to questions should only cover matters not raised in the presentation. Any? Councillor Fox.
Chair, we saw on the drawings that there's an area in the bottom of the site, southwest corner, for where the badger set is. And I just wonder, can I be advised on whether this is something which will be dealt with in more detail in reserve matters, or is there a need for something to go in the list of conditions? Can I have some advice on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Fox. It is a matter that would be addressed within the reserve matters when they come in the future for the layout. I can include a planning condition to ensure that that does come forward in the layout, if you so wish for that to happen.
Any other questions, colleagues? Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. Ms Elliott, your first condition, the standard time condition. In other applications, this committee has been minded to reduce the 3-year period for a reserve matters application to come forward to 2. We had one on the Totnes Road. Would there be any reason why this committee should have a standard 3-year condition and shouldn't be minded to reduce that to 2 years in relation to this application, please?
Thank you, Councillor Billings. I just employed the standard condition. However, if members are wishing to reduce that down to 2 hours, the only thing I would say to be mindful... 2 years. The only thing I would say to be mindful of is obviously the applicant, it may not be the same applicant submitting the reserve matters.
Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? No. If there are no more questions, do I have a proposal, please? Councillor Fox.
Subject to Councillor Billings' suggestion, which I agree with, to go down to 2 years rather than 3, and also some reference to badges, I propose that the application is approved.
Do remember, because I forgot. Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to I was going to second the proposal that Mike had, Councillor Fox had identified, but also invite other colleagues to then debate this, because I was going to add an informative. And my informative was I was going to observe the fact that when we were on the existing Wall Park development, how pleasing I thought that development had come forward. I thought it was visually attractive, and I was hoping to convey to someone looking at this that they should come forward with something that looked like a natural continuation of that development as an informative. I didn't see anything that was immediately clear to me that was a reasonable expectation, or indeed what we'd got in our minds. I'm sure that there would be an alternative solution, but I was hoping to encourage any future applicant to come forward with something that looked very similar. I think, Councillor, your point about the badger condition is very sensible, and I was going to keep it a reduction in time period to 2 years. So, quite happy, Chair, if it moves the meeting on to suggest that as an element.
Thank you. Just to sort of clarify in the informative, I think, as the speaker has already said, that engagement, the pre-application inquiry, the route through Torbay Design Review Panel, those sorts of steps are kind of enshrined in the way we work now. So using an informative kind of takes away that link for us. The expectation would be when we would say the type of building, type of style, type of layout, materiality, architectural treatment, those sorts of things would be born out of pre-application inquiry. So I'm not sure the informative would be needed, if I'm being honest, but this is debate, so you're more than welcome to carry on.
Well, I note that what was particularly pleasing reading this is that we've had a pre-application inquiry on the application that we've got, which is probably why we've jumped so fast forward in the meeting, Chair. So I'm quite happy to to simply sort of accept the views of officers on that and simply second Councillor Fox's proposal, unless any members have got any other thoughts, Chair.
Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. Just once again, as ward member for this application, it's quite strange, isn't it? We've got a site here which is sort of greenfield, not designated for housing, and it's recommended for approval. Quite different to our first application, but it's plain to see that there has been positive engagement. Very pleased about that, which helps us move fairly quickly to making a decision. And this site is, you know, a natural progression almost to the, I always call it the Heritage Close development, because that's the access route through it. So, yes, very pleased with the submission, and also particularly pleased. I was reading the recommendation of improving the sort of bus stop and encouraging people to, you know, use the bus stop and the provision of a shelter and all that kind of thing, because that bus service is a regularly, it's been an improved bus service, and it is quite a well used bus service, and hopefully those sorts of measures, when implemented, would be of assistance to the people living up there on Wall Park Road and the Heritage Close development of it. And so very pleased to, well, I will be supporting the proposal and seconding when we get to that juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tolchard. Yeah, I mean, from my opinion, delighted to see the pre-application process. You know, it's something we've been pushing in the Bay to speed things along, get the right design, etc., in front of us. So that's really good to hear what the applicants have been doing. So, colleagues, we have a proposal, seconder, subject to an extra condition budget.
One on badges and one for the 2 years, and no informative. So is that agreed in the end? Okay, thank you. Just to be completely clear, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So for absolute clarity, Chair, that's reduction in the time period in condition 1 from 2 years to 3 for reserve matters. That's a badger condition as identified by Councillor Fox. 3 to 2. 3 to 2.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, not 2 hours even as well. From 3 to 2. Thank you, colleagues. Good way of adding clarity, and then no informative, Chair. Correct.
On that basis, colleagues, all in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's an approval. Excellent. Moving on to item number 7. And this is to consider an application for Thurlow House, Thurlow Road, planning number P 2024-0429. This is on pages 157 to 204. The clerk has confirmed who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting. I will therefore ask Miss Emily Elliott once again to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you is for Thurlow House on Thurlow Road in Torquay. Just to give members a quick update before I begin my presentation, an additional letter of objection has been received, but it relates to concerns which have already been raised. We have also received a construction management plan from the applicant, and I'm awaiting confirmation from Highways and Environmental Health / Community Safety that they're satisfied with the document. So the application before you seeks full planning permission for the redevelopment of Thurlow House to form 11 two-bedroom apartments. This will include the remodelling of the existing building, including the demolition of the existing extensions, increasing the ridge height, the construction of new extensions and alterations to allow for a conversion from office to residential use to create 7 apartments. The proposed development will also include the construction of a new coach house building within the grounds to provide 4 apartments. The proposal includes associated external works, including parking and landscaping. The vehicular access is maintained within the existing location, which is accessed from Thurlow Road via a private access road, which I will again just get the laser out. So Thurlow Road runs along here, and then the private access is this elongated strip of the site location plan here. In terms of car parking, the development provides 11 spaces, which is located within the northeastern section of the application site, which I'll get to when we get to the layout. But the application site contains a detached Victorian villa and its curtilage, and most recently the building has been used as offices for the Ministry of Justice, and the application site is approximately 0.2 hectares in size. So moving on to the aerial imagery. The site is located within the Upton Conservation Area. The Upton Conservation Character Appraisal identifies the property as a key building within the conservation area. The site is located within Flood Zone 1 and the Torbay-wide critical drainage area, and the site is also located within the Torquay Community Investment Area. So just to remind ourselves, we went up on site earlier, all the surrounding uses adjacent to the application site are residential. So the application site's here, and you can see this large expanse of hard standing, which is car parking, and then the lower ground floor extension to the villa. Before you now is the existing site layout. So today on our site visit we started at the top and we worked our way along the edge. So there's an existing tree where my laser marker is now, and then moving down we've kind of got a large area of hard standing that's used for parking. And then we also have this area here, which is used for parking because it's a continuation at the same level, wasn't it? And then we've just got the lower ground floor extension, which would be visible when you're walking around the lower grounds of the application site. And then the grey area here is the villa with the extensions on it too. We've got a number of trees that are afforded statutory protection because they're within the conservation area, and also some have also got some individual tree preservation orders on them too. Here are the existing elevations. So you can see there's definitely been a number of extensions over the years onto the building. However, the Victorian villa itself remains largely intact, so you can see that. Hopefully you can see it definitely much more easily on the southern elevation. But the northern elevation, that's where we entered the application site today, and we see that flat roof kind of bolt-on extension there. The little separate, I should just say, the eastern and southern elevations that are just floating on the page are part of the lower ground floor extension on the west elevation below. And then we've got the proposed floor plans. As I say, the former use was office use, and that ceased just over a year ago. Moving on to the proposed site layout. So as I mentioned, there would be a reduction in the parking because what we'd see, and if I go for the slightly more zoomed in version, that lower ground floor basement level would be removed, and then we'd have the introduction of the L-shaped coach house running along here where my laser marker is pointing to now. So we'd have a reduction in the parking, and the 11 spaces, there would be a number of them running along here that you can see, and then there would be 3 up towards the entrance of the application site too. The proposal also introduces some landscaping to soften the appearance of the hard landscaping, and as I've mentioned before, the reduction of the hard standing is welcomed. Turning now to the proposed elevations. So you can see here we've got the northern elevation. So again, this is what we see when we first enter into the site. So the 2-storey flat roof extension's gone. We've been presented with a much more in keeping extension. And then over to the left-hand side here, slightly faded out, is the proposed coach house, which when we're going into the application site would appear 1.5 stories rather than the larger massing when you're on the lower section of the application site. Moving to the elevation below, that's the southern elevation, so that's the back of the villa. By the removal of that lower ground floor extension here, it can reinstate the facade, so we've got the bay windows back in at that lower ground floor level too, and then you can see that the parking provision would be at the ground floor level to the right hand side. Now moving on to the top is the eastern elevation. So we've got the coach house. So there you can see it's a 2.5 storey built form. There's a line running along, hopefully, that you can see roughly where my laser's running now. So that's that boundary wall when we're in the application site today that we could see, that's between the application site and the adjacent bungalows. And you can see here the alterations to the main villa roofscape. So it's becoming a mansard roof to basically enable that extra level of accommodation in the roof space and maximising the site. And then below is the eastern elevation where they've basically enabled the whole view of it, although when we're on the site, that lower level where my laser is now is not so visible because it's a bit of a lower section down again. And then we've got the western elevation. So had we gone into the application site today and gone to the right-hand side and walked along the grounds of the application site, we'd have come along to here. But this is the view of the coach house from kind of the internal environment of the application site. And then we've got some additional elevations here showing the proposed coach house. So it's showing that kind of split, although there is another level here, but you can't quite see it on this. You can see it on the elevation below. So in terms of, we've had this application revised, I did mention to a number of you on site, to ensure that the height of it's acceptable in relation to the neighbouring property. Initially it was slightly larger. It was about 1 metre or so more in height, and there were slight concerns of the potential impact on that bungalow that we looked at today. However, those concerns have been alleviated now. I should also point out that the hipped roofscape would also enable the concealment of the lift overrun as well. That was another revision that we had to the scheme, which was much welcomed. And the proposed coach house would be sited approximately 5 metres away from the original villa, which would help to provide a clear separation between the buildings. And as you can see from there, the proposed coach house is 2.5 storeys in height, but one wing of which is in the further portion down here, is of a single storey. And then I've just included some cross sections, which again kind of replicate what I've already gone through, so I'll just brush through these slides. And then again, there's another cross section, so it's just shown cutting through, and again ensuring that the neighbouring bungalow on this middle section is not detrimentally harmed by the height of the proposed coach house. And then we've got the internal floor plan, so it would create 11 two-bedroomed apartments throughout, 7 in the villa and 4 in the coach house. And there's some additional floor plans too. So the right-hand one is that roof space in the villa with the extensions on it. And then I think what's very helpful is the agent has provided some model massing diagrams. So today when we entered, we started over here in the entranceway, and then we walked around and we walked through up to here, looking at, we could kind of see where the parking would be, and then we walked up onto where the lower ground floor existing extension that's to be removed but it's currently there is. So we saw that. And then another viewpoint, so this is almost spinning kind of like 180 the other way around. So we're now looking more towards the back of the site, and it's those 2 adjacent bungalows when we were on our site visit that we saw, the flatted development over here that we also saw. And there's a site photograph of the site entrance. Apologies, I don't have that many site photographs of this one. In terms of key issues and material considerations, the principle of development, the application site is brownfield in nature, and both national and local planning policy supports the reuse of land. The presumption in favour of sustainable development is applied to applications involving the provision of housing. The presumption in favour of sustainable development indicates that planning permission should be granted unless one of the two circumstances apply that are contained within paragraph 11D, neither of which apply, and therefore the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies and the tilted balance is engaged. In terms of the principal development, the development is considered acceptable in principle. Design and visual impact, including the impact upon heritage assets. The proposal includes the demolition of the late 20th century extensions. The proposed demolition is considered to be an enhancement to both designated and non-designated heritage assets, so designated by the Upton Conservation Area and non-designated by the Victorian Villa itself within the application site. The proposal involves making alterations to the original villa roofscape to replace the internal valley with a mansard roof, as well as forming a new hipped mansard roof over the original and proposed extensions. The alterations to the original villa roofscape would have a minor harmful impact on the character and appearance of the villa. However, several villas in the locality have had similar alterations. The proposed coach house in terms of balconies and architectural treatment would result in low harm to both the non-designated heritage asset and the Upton Conservation Area. The form, scale and massing of the proposed coach house when considering the topography of the site is considered to be appropriate when assessing its relationship to the original villa and the wider Upton Conservation Area. The scale and massing of the coach house when viewed from the north remains subservient to the original villa. However, concerns have been raised regarding the design and massing of the coach house when viewing such from the outdoor amenity space and viewing the western elevation of the coach house. These concerns are, however, limited to the views from within the curtilage of the application site. The reduction in the footprint of the existing lower ground floor extension by its removal and the introduction of the coach house on a smaller footprint and the reinstatement of the external amenity space and the southern elevation bay lower ground area is welcomed. Overall, the development would result in less than substantial harm to Thurlow House as a non-designated heritage asset and the Upton Conservation Area. In terms of residential amenity, the application site is relatively close to Torquay Town Centre and the higher Union Street Tor Local Centre and is therefore considered a positive sustainable location for the future use and well suited to residential occupancy, presenting good opportunities for future occupants in terms of access to services, facilities and sustainable transport. All the apartments are considered to provide an acceptable scale of living accommodation with floor areas exceeding the prescribed standards. The proposal is considered to provide all apartments with adequate natural light levels and outlook. The scheme provides a communal green space that cumulatively exceeds the policy-guided minimum of 110 square metres, which provides an acceptable level of outdoor space for future occupants of the apartments. In terms of the finished development, the residential use aligns with the residential uses nearby. The proposed use would not result in undue noise or general disturbance. The move from an office use to residential is likely to be positive. Given its siting scale and design, it's considered that the proposal would not result in any detrimental harm to the amenities of the occupants of neighbouring buildings in terms of their privacy, outlook or access to natural light subject to the planning conditions recommended at the end of the committee report. Highways movement and parking. The proposal proposes to maintain the existing vehicular access from Thurlow Road from a private access road that serves multiple properties. The former use of the application site was as offices and had approximately 20 parking spaces. The proposed development seeks to retain 11 spaces. The Highway Authority is satisfied with the level of parking provision and is satisfied with the accessibility of such. It's noted that a large portion of Torquay is accessible within a 25-minute walk, including a wide range of local amenities and facilities, including schools, healthcare and convenience stores. The Highway Authority has confirmed that they are satisfied with the trips generated by the proposed development and they're likely to have a negligible impact on the surrounding local highway network. In terms of ecology, biodiversity and trees, the applicants submitted various ecological reports, which the Council's ecologist is satisfied with, subject to the conditions recommended at the end of the committee report. As the scheme is part retrospective and having sought legal advice, the scheme is not considered to be biodiversity net gain liable for the mandatory 10%. The trees on site are afforded statutory protection, as I've already mentioned, because the application site is within the Upton Conservation Area, but there are also several individual trees with tree preservation orders within the application site. There are a number of planning conditions recommended at the end of the committee report to ensure that the trees remain protected throughout the construction phase of the development. Flood risk and drainage. The site is within flood zone 1 and the Torbay wide critical drainage area, and the proposed drainage strategy for the surface water would present no risk of flooding. The council's drainage engineer raises no objections. Low carbon development and climate change. The application has been supported by an energy statement. The proposal seeks to reduce energy demand and carbon dioxide measures. Designing out crime. The application has been supported by a list of secure by design measures. In terms of sustainability, the economic and social benefits weigh in favour of the development, whilst the environmental factors weigh neutrally within the planning balance. The proposal is considered to represent sustainable development, and the committee report outlines this. In terms of the planning balance, whilst the harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area has been assessed as being less than substantial, it is sufficient to render the proposal not in accordance with the development plan. However, as noted, the council has less than a 5-year housing land supply, and the development plan must be deemed out of date. The proposal is for 11 residential units, which reduces the weight that should be given to the proposal. This weight should be considered to be moderate, whilst great weight should be given to the conservation of designated heritage assets. However, on balance, the public benefits of the scheme as a whole, when weighed against the level of harm caused, are considered to justify the proposal, and the proposal is considered to represent sustainable development when considering the development plan and the national planning policy framework taken as a whole. In terms of the conclusion, the provision of the 11 residential units is considered a benefit in favour of the development where national guidance seeks to boost the supply of homes. Due to the level of accordance with the development plan and the absence of material considerations that weigh sufficiently against the proposal, the officer recommendation is one of approval, and therefore the officer recommendation is one of approval, subject to the conditions outlined below, outlined within the committee report, apologies I should say, with the final draftings of planning conditions delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, and the resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following planning committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further planning conditions or obligations. If members of the Planning Committee are minded to refuse the application against the officer recommendation, the final drafting of the reasons will be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, and in consultation with the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Elliott. I now call Dr Rodney Halder on behalf of Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. I know you are aware of this, Dr Halder, but you have 5 minutes, and when 1 minute to go, you'll be reminded.
Thank you, Chair. This statement has been reviewed and approved by the steering group of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. The provision of 11 apartments overall will make a valuable contribution towards meeting the housing needs of Torquay, and the Forum is pleased that the existing villa will be remodelled. Renovation of the villa and construction of the new buildings will provide additional homes on a brownfield site that is currently derelict. We judge that increasing the height of the building will not affect the external appearance of the property to any significant extent. Removal of the ugly 20th century extensions and additions and restoration of the original appearance of the villa will be beneficial, as will remodelling of the interior to remove offices and create internal living space. Construction of the new extension and new coach house and creation of the courtyard garden will also be beneficial. Overshadowing analysis shows us that the new coach house has little impact on loss of light or overlooking of adjacent properties. We have some concerns about the loss of the existing historic windows. Replacement with UPVC equivalents would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the building. We are also concerned that the car parking provision of only one space per apartment makes no allowance for visitors, and delivery vehicles do have a somewhat restricted space. But in summary, we have minor concerns about the heritage impact on the Ellicombe conservation area and the limited provision of parking spaces, but nevertheless, considered overall, the proposal is supported, as we feel the benefit of remodelling Thurlow House and providing 11 new apartments significantly outweighs the harm, and the Forum recommends this application is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr Halder. I now call Mr Kenny to address the meeting in support of the application Mr. Kenny, you have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I'm Chris Kenny, architect with K. Elliott. So 35 Thurlow Road is in a central, sustainable location. As has been mentioned, it's last used as a probation office for the Ministry of Justice. It's in poor condition, some structural issues with the bay windows, some were collapsing at the time of purchase. It's been unsympathetically extended in the past, in the late 20th century. It's got two large extensions, as you've seen today. So one on the front elevation, which is the primary public-facing elevation, two-storey flat roof. So you have no idea that there's a lovely Victorian villa behind that front elevation. And to the rear, we've got the large single-storey office extension, which conceals two of the bay windows at lower ground level, but also creates a massive area of hard standing above it, which is used for car parking. So the setting of the villa is really undermined by these two extensions. So the project provides an opportunity to return the building to residential use and restore the status of the villa within the conservation area. Proposal creates 11 much needed new residential units, 7 within the existing villa and 4 within the proposed coach house building. So the poor quality, harmful extensions will be fully demolished, which will create a net increase of 100 square metres of external landscape space, so creating a whole new flat garden area and also softening up the appearance of the building around the perimeter. So at the front elevation, the new extension will be screened with some new planting borders. And importantly as well, the lower ground floor, the existing bay windows will be restored and reinstated. The proposed villa works, there'll be a new modest street facing extension to replace the existing one, which will allow the villa to appear as a Victorian villa when you approach it from the driveway, and that'll have a massive increase in the quality and the appearance and the setting of the building. As the extension's a small footprint, we felt it was appropriate actually to blend the architecture in with the existing building rather than doing something different. And there's a villa immediately adjacent to the site, which you might have seen today, called Lea Hurst, which has got exactly the same mansard gable pitched roof on the end. So we've just mimicked that architecture and placed it on the front of this one here, so it's in keeping with the area. The existing main villa roof is a double gable roof, so it's got a big valley in the centre, and that valley is not seen from any public space, so we've sought to use that opportunity and fill it to create a mansard roof, an additional dwelling. As part of development, and we've sought to insert a balcony and provide roof lights rather than provide any dormer windows, so the profile of the roof is kept as existing. The coach house, as has been mentioned, the main viewpoint really is from the side of the villa, so when you approach it, it'll appear as a 1.5-storey building, which is quite low scale and in keeping with many other coach houses in the immediate area. The potential impact has been mentioned already on the neighbouring properties has been carefully considered, so we looked at daylight, sunlight analysis. We've tweaked the roof pitch to make sure that we have got zero impact on the neighbouring property, and we've altered window positions to make sure there's no overlooking as well. So in summary, we think it's a really sensitive development on a brownfield site, taking this existing office building, turning it into much needed residential accommodation. Development will support a local developer and local workers, so hopeful that you'll recommend it for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Committee members, I now invite questions to our planning officer. Please may I remind members questions should only cover matters not raised in the presentation. Sir Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. Just referring to the concerns about the windows, it may be addressed in the report here, and I may have missed it, so I'm sorry about that if I have. The concerns about the type of windows being proposed, have those concerns been addressed in any way? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tolchard. On condition 2, I've recommended that notwithstanding the approved plans and details, prior to the installation of new doors and windows, the following broken sections, reveal sections, sill sections, frame and door materials are to be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. So there are several concerns raised about the use of UPVC, so that condition basically doesn't agree to the UPVC being used within the main villa.
Thank you very much. Yes, I found it now. Thank you.
Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. Looking at the objections, one of them is from a gentleman who writes on behalf of his parents, and the address of his parents isn't actually listed here. I was trying to understand, I don't need to know necessarily what it is, it's been redacted, but would it be right to assume that that's one of the two bungalows near to the property, or one of those immediately adjacent to it, that broad area?
Thank you, Councillor Billings. Yes, you're correct. It's relating to the second bungalow when we were near the lower ground floor extension and the two windows on that gable end. It's a relation from those that live there.
Thank you. And I was just wondering whether there was any further reflection. We can probably come to it a bit later on if it helps. I think there's one of them, an objection down from Mr. Watling in relation to a block of flats. I'd read that as a letter of support. I don't know whether there's any further thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. Having reviewed that before I wrote the committee report, yes, I agree. I think that is a letter of support, but I think maybe they've accidentally ticked the wrong box when they've pressed submit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Strang.
It's more of a comment really than a question. I think the quality of the submission that we've received on this application is helping us far more greatly than the quality that we received on the first application. And I just wonder whether there's any way we can seek to get this something near this sort of quality on any future applications.
Recognise that the first application was submitted some time ago, 18-20 months ago. We've got a new validation list, we've got a new service for pre-application inquiries, we've got Torbay design review panels. We've evolved a lot over that process. So very much the way of working we expect, and a really good relationship with local builders and local architects.
Excellent, thank you very much.
I've got one, maybe two. Again, forgive me if I've missed this, but I think I haven't. The parking, it doesn't seem to be any allocated parking, just rather than stated 11 spots. Is that correct? Sometimes we get applications with allocated and sometimes naming them, and sometimes we don't. So just check on that first.
Yeah, so the proposed site layouts don't allocate the parking spaces to the flats. I think that's a bit more at the discretion later on, depending on the potential future users and which spaces may be more appropriate for them.
Thank you, because I then read, and this is why I thought maybe they're linked or not linked, that there'd be 3 electrical charging points only. So I wondered how that was all going to be worked out in the rounds, but we can talk on that later. The other bit I was trying to ascertain, we need housing in the bay. We don't need more Airbnbs in the bay. In reading this, is it purely for residential but not used for Airbnb, or has that not been discussed, or is it not in? I missed it again.
Yeah, okay. So I'll address both points. The electric charging point, the provision of 3 is because the development plan requires a certain percentage for flatted development. We therefore can't increase that percentage. However, building regulations may be able to secure a higher provision of electric charging in the future to future-proof that. And then secondly, in terms of the Airbnb potential holiday let usage, that hasn't been a consideration, but there is a condition removing the permitted development rights from C3 to C4. So properties are able, even flats, can change from a flat to a small house of multiple occupation because it's within the community investment area. The policy within our local plan tries to resist that change. That's why that condition's been included. But in terms of Airbnb and holiday lets, at the moment, that I don't think the new use class has come in to England for that. So our hands are tied there.
Thank you. I didn't know if it had come in or no. Not that. Thank you. Councillor Billings.
I think, Chair, just picking up on the only strong point that drew my attention when I was walking around, and that's the impact on the adjacent bungalow, because obviously there's a close proximity to the proposed coach house. Clearly, where the coach house was sited in relation to the boundary impacts on that. I just wonder if we could recap a little bit about your thinking about why that proximity was appropriate in relation to the impact, what sort of habitable rooms, what their outlooks are, and whether you think an alternative distance would have been more appropriate than what's proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Billings. As discussed on site today, initially when I went and undertook my site visit of Thurlow House first, I had some concerns over the two bungalows, and therefore I found it appropriate to actually arrange site visits both internally and externally to ensure that their internal living environment as well as their garden spaces would be protected with the development. The first bungalow, as we walked into the site, the first one, I didn't really have any concerns with, and they didn't raise any real objections to the proposal either. They were very supportive of it finally being brought back into use. As for the second bungalow, having gone into their property, the two windows on that gable end that we looked at today, I consider them to be secondary windows, one of which is for a dining room and the other one is for a lounge. The lounge has got very large windows that overlook onto the garden, so I'm trying to think of which elevation we're on, so I think it would be their southern elevation on that bungalow would be looking onto the garden, which would provide sufficient outlook and natural light levels. In terms of the proposal, we did have it revised to ensure that the reduction in height wouldn't kind of have that overbearing dominant effect on the property. But in terms of them being secondary windows and into visibility and things, the agent did revise the scheme to ensure that one of the windows, which is almost opposite the openings, is obscurely glazed, and I've recommended that too as a planning condition. But as for the other openings, particularly within the roofscape, they are at high level, and I don't consider it necessary or reasonable to employ conditions to secure those to be obscurely glazed.
Thank you, Chair. I think, Ms Elliott, you said the height of the ridge was reduced through those discussions and negotiations. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Any further questions? So I'll open the application up for debate, colleagues. Councillor Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, this development sounds very positive. It's in an area which I used to represent as ward councillor before boundary changes, and it's bringing more welcomed housing that, as we've said many times tonight, we desperately need. It's in a very convenient location for our town and amenities, and yeah, it seems very positive. Thank you.
Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is an extremely positive application. If one looks at the building as shown in these 3D artist impressions, which were extremely helpful to interpret the scheme with, particularly as the flat elevation drawings, they don't really show what's the separation distance between the coach house and the existing the existing Victorian villa that's there. What's before us is really commendable. The villa, because of its removal of the more recent, less sympathetic additions, becomes far more visually appealing. We get to see a proper main elevation to the access onto the site. We get to see the clear separation between the modern addition in the coach house and the existing dweller, because the existing villa rather, because they're not physically attached to one another. We get to see the bay windows, and although through these schemes we've got a flat roof on the top of what I think is a false ridge, which we don't have at the moment. I don't think you'll see that from standing on site, and that won't be visually apparent. So I think what we've got in front of us is a really positive scheme, and I'm delighted that it's being brought forward and look to see it being completed. I'm quite happy to propose approval so in line with the officer report at the appropriate time, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further debate, colleagues? Sorry, Councillor Strang.
I was just going to say I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Billings' analysis of the application, and I'd be quite happy to second the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Strang. Yes, it's so good to go site visits, in my opinion, and I was standing on where all the concrete car parking was, thinking, how on earth did this ever get built, that part, and how on earth did the front get built, because they're just hideous. I understand now the probation, maybe that's how I don't know, but what a dramatic improvement it would make to reveal the Victorian villa. So yeah, being a person who loves his heritage, I'm delighted with this plan, I must admit. So I've got proposer, got a seconder. Move to the vote if anybody else needs to make any other comments. So proposal is for approval, subject to the conditions that have been mentioned. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Just then take a couple of minutes while swapping of paperwork's done. Thank you.
Call us all back. Thank you, everyone. So we move on now to item number 8, to consider an application for Brixham Bowling Club, Nelson Road, Brixham, application number P2024-0665. The clerk has confirmed those who registered to speak before the meeting. I will therefore ask Mr. Jim Blackwell to introduce the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is before you today because it's on council-owned land. The scheme of delegation allows for these sorts of things to be delegated powers, but in this case there were a number of objections which I'll come on to shortly. So this is an application for alterations to create a disabled access ramp, a new entrance door, and it'll be to the south and east side of the existing clubhouse. To skip on to the site surroundings, we have the existing site here. Sorry, I'll just get the laser pointer to work. We have the existing site here. If I leave that there, and then we have Brixham Bowling Club, the club itself to the right-hand side. It's a single-storey building, and you can see going south-west Nelson Road, which curves round. Just to the south, there's a tennis court and a tarmac tennis court and basketball court, and then Fursner Green to the east. This is the existing photographs. You can see the north elevation showing the stepped access that's current, the east elevation, which shows that change of level, and then below it, the west elevation, which is that connection to Nelson Road. You can see the fence line there. And then to the left-hand side, bottom left, you can see a sort of 3D model of the site layout, so you can see the red line plan around, the red line boundary around it. Here's the existing layout, which is quite simple. You've got an access to the left-hand side, and then it drops down into some steps. It's a simple single-storey building with a large clubhouse in the middle, bar and then changing facilities in the kitchen. These are existing elevations, quite a simple building form. This is the proposed layout, so you can see there, which is annotated in blue, an entrance onto Nelson Road, drops down to the back of that building. Change of level means it's ramped. It accords with Sport England's design guidance for ramps in these types of facilities. It then turns around and heads north and gives you level access to the pitch side. You can see here on plan the path is going to be made slightly wider from what's there already. It will enable a new front access door to provide level access within the building. And you can see that elevationally, you can see the top drawing with the new door in. You can see the north elevation with no change, west elevation no change. South elevation, you can see the new door, and then the ramp drop down with a simple handrail. And then the proposed east elevation, you can see how that ramp then drops down with a handrail to pitch side, and a very simplistic proposed perspective at the bottom with a typical sort of indicative design for railings. Moving on to principal development, obviously it's just create a disabled access ramp and a new entrance door. There's no real development plan policies to indicate that the proposal is not accepted in principle. In terms of the design, there was a couple of objections around the design of the railings, out of character with the area. However, these are largely unseen from the street. They're very simple. White colour is relatively acceptable in a recreational context, and it's outside any form of sort of protection or designation such as conservation areas. The new door will not have an adverse setting on the clubhouse or wider recreational setting. The widening of the gate area, which meets the road, will not have an adverse impact on the design or character of the existing development or the wider setting or the streetscape. All the materials are acceptable and not be alien to the street or the site or the neighbourhood. There were some concerns from objectors about the design of the railings, the potential for light increase from the door, which we do not consider to be detrimental, which is covered in the residential amenity section, which we say that it's just a case of a simple change to a new door. There's no increase in light pollution to the amenity of neighbours, wouldn't result in any loss of privacy or sort of residential impacts on those neighbours. In terms of ecology and biodiversity, they've submitted the correct information. There's limited impact. flood risk? Is it acceptable? There's no other objections, just only acceptance from our consultees. Those are the local plan and Brixham neighbourhood plan policies. And this is subject to approval as the conditions outlined in the committee report, final drafting conditions delegated Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Change Emergency, resolution of any new material considerations may come to light following planning committee to be delegated to Divisional Director, including the addition of any necessary further planning conditions or obligations. And if you manage to refuse the application against officer recommendation, the final drafting of reasons will be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, and in consultation with the chairperson. And apologies, I was had the dog at almost on my lap, so that's why I was stuttering there a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I'm now going to call on Mr. Vic Ellery to address the meeting in support of the application. Mr. Ellery, you have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when 1 minute is remaining. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and colleagues. It's nice to see some ex-colleagues and officers here. I have the honour of representing Brixham Bowling Club on this application because it was obvious to us with the number of steps from the clubhouse to the bowling green, people with mobility issues and disablement was finding it difficult. And as you know, the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equality Act clearly indicates that you have to provide for people with disabilities and mobility issues. And we felt this had to be done because we've had a couple of incidents where people with mobility issues, and particularly disabled person in a wheelchair, it was very difficult to get them down the steps to the bowling green so they could play the game that they love. So this is a simple application to extend a path, the back of the clubhouse, down the side on a ramp to get to the green level so that anyone with mobility issues can access it easily and safely, and also a door into the back of the clubhouse so that people with mobility issues or in a wheelchair can access the clubhouse on the level. So that's a simple application like that. I do respect the objections, but I'm sorry, they didn't have any major impact on them whatsoever. So I just asked the committee if they would please approve so that we can get on and make life for people with mobility issues and disablement to play the game of bowls. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lurley. So, committee members, invite you to ask any questions to the planning officer, but as usual, remind you that they should only questions relate to what hasn't been raised in the presentation. Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just reading that there's already a disability access. Is that correct or not?
No, there's a stepped access down, and it's about the sort of simplicity and legibility of the route as well. So it drops down to the outside and then turns. So it's providing something that's needed. I don't think they would be applying if they didn't have a requirement, and something that was DDA compliant to both the building and pitch side.
Thank you.
No further questions? Open the application up for debate. Councillor Pentney. Councillor Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Accessibility is key in this day and age. Everybody has the right to be able to access places, however, whatever disability, be it physical, sensory or neuro, you have. So I really welcome this. And I think it is great because sometimes people with disabilities are excluded from participating in things that they would really like to do. So, you know, having this ramp, having this means of accessing the environment is a real positive, and thank you.
Councillor Penny.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because very much for the reasons Councillor Darling just outlined, this one really is a no-brainer, and I'll be happy to propose approval as and when we get to that stage, Chair.
Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chairman. I very much welcome this application. The name Tolchard is well known in the bowls world. My husband, who's now nearly 81, still plays with a dicky hip. And I have a niece and nephew who have both captained England. It's a marvellous game for any age, and people who probably can't participate in possibly other sports and games can continue actually to play bowls, as I know, for a very long time. So I welcome this application to enable people to be able to enjoy and participate in what is a marvellous sport. I'm absolutely useless at it, but I recognise the advantages of it. Thank you.
Councillor Strang.
As this application is in my ward, I'd like to say I will support it. It's brilliant to see one of our facilities enhanced in this way.
Councillor Billings.
Well, how, Chair, could I follow Councillor Tolchard's comment? But reading through the objections quite carefully, I think most of them relate to concerns that aren't actually part of this scheme. I think there are concerns that have been written about a triangular parcel of land, which is outside of the red line application area, and some of them relate to anticipations about other things that the land might be used with in the future. And I think it's incumbent on us to say, well, actually, it's very clear from the plans that this development is within the red line. It's not covering that triangular parcel of land. Nothing endangers that. It's not mission creep. It's not encroachment. This is as far as I understand it, simply the provision of a disability ramp to enable access into the facility, and it's very simply that's what it is, and nothing more. And I think it's important to add that, and I think that possibly, Chair, is explaining why there's very clear support amongst colleagues, and why possibly members aren't seeing this in the same eyes as some of the letters of concern that we've read about on the planning portal. So I'd also like to support this as well when we get to that appropriate point, Chair, but you've already got a proposer and a seconder.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Chair. As someone married to somebody who's permanently in a wheelchair when she goes out and experiencing day-to-day discrimination in all sorts of ways, some subtle, some not so subtle, I totally welcome this as a brilliant application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. It's so good to hear, people talk on this, and giving personal experience. Thank you, Vic, for alluding to the issues that, especially one of your members has experienced. And, from what I can see, this will alleviate that problem and let the person get down on the green and maybe bowl a bit better than Councillor Tolchard. Maybe they can have an end or two together. I think we can get to, the vote here. So we've got who was proposing? Sorry. Councillor Pentney, seconded. Councillor Darling. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
We were just now going to moving to item number 9.
This is to note the Appeals Monitoring Report and Appendix 1. I can call Mr. Jim Blackwell to present the report, please.
This report is to be noted by members. This is a quarterly report. Obviously, councils all receive emails with updates from the planning appeal decisions. This sort of combines that all into one report, so it's easy digestible. You can start to see patterns and assess our quality of work. We work closely with the Chair of Planning Committee and Vice Chair to look at trends and use modern technology. We actually use Power BI to track all our and scrutinise our decision making, and that's just collating it, so you're fully abreast of the situation in terms of appeal decisions. Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions? Members, this report is for noting, therefore no decision is required. Once again, thank you all for attending this committee. The meeting is now closed. I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Wish you a safe journey home.